I swear that dog was guarding something, and it wasn't food. That was the first thing I said when I radioed in from the dock, standing with my boots half soaked and my flashlight still shaking in my hand. The wind was coming in off the bay that morning, pushing a sharp breeze through the gray sky above Harrow Point, and all I could think about was the way those deep brown eyes looked right into me as I stepped aboard that old fishing trawler. It started earlier that morning, just past 6. I was heading out to check a series of fishing buoys after the latest storm had tossed up everything from driftwood to broken piers along the coastline. My name's Kevin Dorsey, and I work for the local harbor patrol in a little coastal town in Maine. We don't get much excitement besides the occasional storm damage, a loose mooring, or maybe a raccoon invasion on one of the party boats. So when I saw the old boat listing awkwardly near the edge of Cutter's Cove, I figured it was just another casualty of last night's rough surf. But the moment I got closer, something felt off. First, the boat wasn't registered. No numbers on the hull, no name on the side. Just a scuffed-up green deck, frayed ropes, and that faded white cabin door swaying lightly in the wind. And then came the bark. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't even loud. It was this tired, raspy little sound, like someone knocking from the inside of a closet they'd been stuck in too long. I cut the engine on my patrol skiff and drifted in, tossing a line onto the railing and stepping onto the back of the boat. That's when I saw her. A thin, dirt-matted mutt, maybe part Labrador, maybe part shepherd, with one ear bent sideways and a coat that looked more like tangled weeds than fur. She was crouched near the cabin door. Not growling, not wagging, just staring. I held my hands out and crouched down slowly. "Hey there, girl. What are you doing out here?" She didn't flinch, didn't blink. Her eyes were locked on mine, and I swear it felt like she was trying to say something. Not bark it, not whine it, just say it. I took one step closer, and that's when she moved. Not toward me, but toward the door, placing her body in front of it. Still no growl, just that steady, unblinking gaze. The cabin smelled like salt and mildew, and something else I couldn't place at first. The door creaked open, and I leaned my head in slowly. Inside was darkness, but then my eyes adjusted. A blanket, a tipped-over lantern, 2 cans of beans, and a pair of broken reading glasses on the floor. And in the corner, behind a pile of empty water jugs, was a small red journal. She gave a low, quiet whine as I picked it up. I didn't open it then. I just looked back at her, and she looked at the journal, then back at me. Then she sat down. That's the moment I called it in. Animal control arrived first, then a few folks from town who'd heard about the mysterious boat. Word travels fast when nothing ever happens. We took the dog, she didn't fight it, and brought her to the local vet, Dr. Morgan. Said she was malnourished but not injured. Someone had clearly taken care of her once. I kept the journal. I know I shouldn't have, not without checking with the sheriff, but something told me it was important, and I wasn't ready to turn it into evidence. Not yet. The first page had one sentence. "If someone finds this, please take care of Clover." Clover. That was her name. The next several pages were dated entries. Some messy, others almost too neat. A man's handwriting with smudges in the ink. I read the first week's worth while sitting in my truck outside the vet's office. He wrote about sailing alone. He never said why. He wrote about losing someone, though he never named them. Just said, "She would have loved this view," or "She always told me I should learn to cook better." But most of all, he wrote about Clover. How she barked at every seagull, but let the waves rock her to sleep. How she hated fish, but loved peanut butter crackers. How after weeks of grief and silence, she was the only thing that made him laugh again. Then the entries got shorter. Ran out of fuel. Might drift a while. Storm coming. Hope we make it to shore. Clover's still wagging. Keeps licking my hand like it'll fix my headache. The final entry just said, "If she makes it and I don't, she deserves more than the sea." I'll admit it. I sat in that truck with my hands on the wheel and my throat too tight to speak for a good 10 minutes. It wasn't just sadness. It was this wave of something bigger. Like I'd just stumbled onto the last pages of someone's love letter to the only thing keeping them going. Clover was safe now, resting at the clinic. I stayed with her that night, just to keep her calm. I brought her a blanket and a peanut butter sandwich. She didn't eat it right away. She just sniffed it, then rested her head on my leg. She didn't bark again until morning. The next day, I walked back down to the docks. The boat was being towed in for inspection. Sheriff Calhoun met me there. He's one of those guys who looks serious even when he's relaxed. He asked what I thought we should do. About the journal? About the dog, about the man, about whatever's in that cabin that made you call me without saying why. I handed him the notebook. He read the first page and sighed. We'll try to find next of kin. Someone must have missed him. But part of me doubted it. That kind of goodbye didn't sound like a man who had anyone left. So I started asking around. Boat rental records, marina logs, even the post office. Everyone in town knew someone, and that meant someone had to know him. In the meantime, Clover stayed with me. I wasn't supposed to take her in permanently, but she made herself at home anyway. She found my socks, my couch, and the exact spot of sunlight in the living room by noon every day. She was waiting, I knew it, for something, for someone, or maybe for a promise to be kept. Because here's the thing. That boat wasn't just some storm-struck wreck. It was a home. A floating one, sure, but a home built on grief, healing, and the quiet presence of a shaggy little dog who knew more than anyone gave her credit for. And as I stood at the docks, watching the sun cut through the clouds and light up that weather-worn hull, I realized I wasn't just helping a rescue case. I was answering a request from a man I'd never met, for a dog who waited longer than anyone should have to. And something in that cabin, something we hadn't even found yet, was going to change everything. The first real clue came from a coffee-stained receipt. It was buried under a pile of old nautical maps we found inside the boat's cabin after it was towed to the impound lot behind the marina. Sheriff Calhoun had a couple of the junior deputies go through the boat with gloves and a flashlight. I stuck around too, mostly because I couldn't stop thinking about Clover. I had left her back home curled up on the foot of my bed with a belly full of scrambled eggs. I told myself she needed the rest. But deep down, I think I just didn't want her to see what else we might uncover. The receipt was dated 3 weeks ago, from a hardware store 2 towns over. The name on it was written in block letters. Barely legible. B. Carter. That was something. Not much, but enough to start asking questions. I made a couple phone calls and found the store. A young guy named Mitch answered and said he remembered an older man who came in asking about marine-grade rope and solar lanterns. Said he looked like a drifter, but paid in cash, and had a dog with him. The dog wouldn't stop looking at the door, Mitch said. Like she was making sure they could leave if they had to. That sounded like Clover. I drove out there the same day. Took me just over an hour past a stretch of highway lined with pine trees and sagging barns. The hardware store sat next to a bait shop and a diner that looked like it hadn't changed since the 60s. I thanked Mitch in person and showed him a photo of Clover I'd taken the night before. She was sitting on my couch, head tilted like she was judging the weather forecast. "That's her," Mitch confirmed. "Never seen a dog look more serious, like she had places to be." Back home, I found Clover waiting by the front door, as if she'd timed it. I leaned down and scratched the patch behind her ear, where the fur was growing back softer. "We're getting closer, girl," I said. You feel it too, don't you?" She blinked slowly and gave a gentle wag. But she didn't move from her spot. She stayed right there until I opened the door. That night, I read more of the journal. The entries continued, each one revealing more about the man who had once called the boat home. His name was Ben Carter, confirmed by a torn letter tucked into the back of the notebook. A return address out of Virginia. The handwriting on the envelope matched the journal. The letter wasn't addressed to anyone. Just a note, unfinished. "Dear M, if you ever wonder what happened, I didn't go to disappear. I went to find peace. Clover didn't ask for any of this, but she stayed. She always stayed." There were no more lines. The next morning, I called the address. An older woman picked up. Her voice was cautious but warm. Said her name was Martha. When I mentioned Ben Carter, the silence on the line stretched long enough for me to wonder if she'd hung up. "He was my brother," she finally said. "But we haven't spoken in years." I told her what we'd found. The boat, the journal, and the dog. "I knew he had a dog," she said. "He'd talk about her in his letters. After his wife passed, he wrote less and less. Said the world didn't make sense without her. Said Clover was the only part that still did." Martha didn't cry. Not while I was on the phone. But her voice cracked when I offered to send her the journal. "No," she said gently. "I think you're meant to have it. Ben would have trusted the one Clover trusted. Keep it. Tell her story." I hung up and stared at the journal in my hands, the pages worn thin at the edges. Clover nudged her nose into my arm and settled in beside me like she was trying to say I'd done the right thing. I took her for a walk around the lake that afternoon. The leaves were starting to shift into that rusty gold that comes with September in Maine. Kids were out fishing with their dads, couples walking slowly with hands tucked into each other's coat sleeves. A woman passing by pointed at Clover and said, "That's the dog from the docks, isn't it? The one they found on the boat?" I nodded, unsure how word traveled that fast. "She looks happier now," the woman said. "Like she's finally home." Was she? I didn't know. She still didn't bark at squirrels or chase geese the way other dogs did. She moved quietly, watched everything, especially the water. That night, just before turning in, I heard something at the door. I opened it and saw Clover standing with her front paws on the porch railing, looking out toward the marina. The moonlight caught her eyes in a way that made them look almost amber. I walked over and sat beside her. "You miss him," I said. "I know." She didn't move, just stayed still, breathing slow. The next morning, I had coffee with Sheriff Calhoun at the bait shop diner. He handed me a printed report from the Coast Guard. A body had washed up a few miles down the coast. They'd sent it to the county coroner. Male, older, no ID. Likely cause of death: exposure and exhaustion. The timing lined up. I read the report, my hand tightening slightly around the ceramic coffee mug. I didn't say anything for a minute. "He left her behind so she'd live," I finally said. Calhoun nodded. "And she waited so someone would find him." We didn't tell the press, didn't want to turn it into a headline. Some stories are better left with their dignity intact. Instead, I put together a small memorial by the lake. Nothing fancy. Just a carved plank of driftwood with his name and the dates we could guess. I added a second one beside it that simply said, "Clover's Watch." And then, something changed. Clover started playing. It happened out of nowhere. I was tossing a tennis ball in the yard for a neighbor's dog, and Clover just joined in. She chased it, brought it back halfway, and then flopped down like she'd just crossed a finish line. From then on, she started seeking out other dogs. wagging her tail when kids walked by, even barking at the mail truck once. The neighborhood noticed. A few folks brought her toys. Someone even knitted her a sweater. But the best change came one afternoon when a school group came to the marina for a field trip. I was giving them a tour of the harbor patrol station, showing them life jackets and flare guns. Clover trotted in behind me, sniffed the room, and then lay down right in front of the kids. A boy with freckles and a Red Sox cap reached out a cautious hand. "She friendly?" "She's the friendliest," I said. He scratched her head. She leaned into his hand. Just a little. But enough. One of the teachers asked if I'd ever thought about training her as a therapy dog. "You know," she said, "for kids dealing with grief, you've got a living miracle on your hands." That word hit different. Miracle. But maybe she was. Not just for surviving, but for holding on long enough to remind someone like me that love doesn't disappear when the people do. I signed us up for the therapy dog program that night. She passed the temperament test in 2 weeks. The trainers couldn't believe she was a rescue. Said she responded to commands before they were even finished. Like she already knew what to do. "She's been waiting for this," I told them. At the next vet visit, Dr. Morgan smiled when she saw her. "You've put on weight," she told Clover. "And that coat's finally coming back nice." Clover wagged. She was changing, becoming more than a rescue dog. She was becoming someone's reason to smile again. First mine, then the kids, then anyone who spent 5 minutes near her. And just when I thought the story was done unfolding, the knock came at my door. A man stood there, late 30s, worn backpack, clean but tired. He looked at Clover and froze. "I think she was my dad's dog," he said softly. My breath caught in my chest. The man reached into his coat and pulled out a photo. A Polaroid. Faded, but clear enough. Ben Carter, a younger version of the man in the journal entries, standing on the boat's deck. Beside him, a puppy. Clover. I stepped aside. "She's been waiting," I said. But Clover didn't run to him. Not yet. She walked up slowly, sniffed his hand, looked into his face, and then with a soft, quiet sigh, she leaned against his legs. The living room was silent, except for the soft click of Clover's nails on the hardwood floor. She paced slowly toward the man, pausing halfway to glance at me, like she needed reassurance. I gave her a quiet nod. She looked back at him, then took the last few steps and leaned in again. He didn't cry, not exactly, but his eyes glistened in the low afternoon light, and he dropped to one knee, letting his backpack slide off his shoulder with a soft thud. "Hey girl," he whispered. "You still remember me, don't you?" Clover's tail moved in a soft rhythm, slow and steady, brushing the floor. Then finally, she sat down right in front of him. He let out a shaky breath and gave her a gentle pat. I stepped forward and extended a hand. "Kevin Dorsey, Harbor Patrol, and I guess, caretaker until now." He stood and shook my hand. "Caleb Carter." He looked a lot like the man in the photo, especially around the eyes. The resemblance was clear, even through the years. I offered him a seat and asked if he wanted some coffee. He nodded, settling into the armchair by the window, still watching Clover like she might vanish if he blinked too long. We talked slowly at first. He told me he'd been traveling for work the past couple of years. Construction contracts, short gigs. Said he lost touch with his father after the funeral for his mother. "It got too hard," he said. "We didn't fight, We just fell apart. He didn't know his father had taken to the sea. Didn't know about the journal, the boat, or the final entries until a friend back in Virginia told him they'd seen a local news snippet about a dog found on an abandoned trawler. I just had this feeling, he said. I couldn't explain it. But when I saw that photo of Clover, when I saw her eyes, I knew. I went to the bedroom and brought out the journal. Caleb took it with both hands like it was made of glass. He flipped to the middle and started reading silently, his thumb brushing against the creases in the pages. He didn't say anything for a long time. I thought I had time, he whispered eventually. I thought I could come back when I was ready. But he ran out first. Clover climbed onto the rug beside his chair and rested her head against his foot. He looked down, and this time his smile broke through the sorrow. She waited, didn't she? Every day, I said, and she didn't trust just anyone, but she trusted you fast. Caleb stayed the night in the spare room. I offered, and he accepted without hesitation. The next morning we walked down to the lake together. The memorial I'd made wasn't much, but he stood in front of it for a long time. He didn't speak, just knelt down and placed a smooth stone at the base of the driftwood marker. After a while, he turned to me. I don't think I can take her. Not yet. I'm still moving around too much. No home base, but if it's all right, I'd like to come back, visit, maybe help with the therapy work you've been doing with her. I nodded. You're always welcome. The next few weeks settled into a rhythm. Caleb came by a few times a week, always bringing something, an old collar of Clover's, a worn-out tennis ball, or a photo from when she was still a puppy. One day, he brought a video. A short clip of Clover running around a backyard sprinkler, ears flopping, tail wagging so fast she could barely stay upright. Clover watched it with her head tilted, ears perked. When the sound of her own barking came through the speakers, she barked once in reply, then looked up at Caleb. He laughed for the first time in front of me. She was always a little clumsy, he said, but smart. Smarter than any dog I've ever met. I couldn't argue with that. By the time fall rolled into its colder months, Clover had become something of a town treasure. Kids would wave when they saw her from the school bus. The bakery downtown kept a special jar of peanut butter biscuits behind the counter just for her. One of the local churches even invited us to bring her by during a community grief support night. She sat by every person who needed her, one after the other, until the room felt warmer just because she was in it. One night, after one of those sessions, I noticed Caleb lingering in the back, his hands deep in his jacket pockets. Everything okay? I asked. Yeah, he said. Just watching. He looked at Clover lying at the feet of a woman in her 70s, her hand resting gently on the dog's back. She's doing what Dad wanted, Caleb said, more than he ever thought she could. He turned to me. Do you ever feel like animals understand more about what we need than we do? All the time. And then, in early December, something unexpected happened. I got a call from the Regional Animal Therapy Association. They wanted to nominate Clover for a special recognition award, one given annually to dogs who had made a unique impact in their communities. They asked if I could provide documentation of her story. I sent them the journal. I didn't hear back for 2 weeks. Then a woman named Jenna from the association called me directly. I just finished reading the entire journal, she said. I cried twice. And I think I understand now. This isn't just about therapy or grief. This is about love that outlives the person who gave it. They accepted her. We were invited to a small ceremony in Vermont where the award would be presented. Caleb insisted on driving. He said it felt right. We bundled up Clover in a blanket in the back seat and hit the road. The drive took about 5 hours, broken up with stops for gas and snowball fights. At one point, Caleb handed me a folded piece of paper. "What's this?" "Something I've been writing. For Dad. For Clover. For me." It was a short speech. Not flowery. Not poetic. But honest. At the ceremony, they gave him the microphone. "My father raised me on stories," he said. "Fishing trips, campfire tales, little made-up adventures just to make me laugh. But the one story I never expected was the one he left behind on that boat." I read it in his handwriting. I saw it in Clover's eyes. And I'm here today because they both kept each other alive long enough for me to find them again. Clover barked once as if on cue. Everyone laughed. We drove home under a sky full of stars, the kind that made the night feel deep and safe at the same time. Clover slept most of the way, her head on Caleb's lap. Back in town, life didn't slow down. If anything, it picked up. We started getting letters from people who had read about her. Some had seen the ceremony online. Others heard through friends. One woman wrote, "After I lost my husband, I stopped talking. I didn't want to be around anyone, but watching Clover made me want to try again. Thank you for sharing her with us." We built a little website to keep track of her visits and therapy work. Caleb helped design it. He added a section with scanned pages of the journal. Just a few, with names and personal details blurred out. It was enough to share the spirit of the story without giving away too much. We called it Clover's Compass, because no matter where she went, she brought people back to something good, something solid, something they'd forgotten they could still find. Word traveled. We started getting invitations from hospitals, schools, and even first responder units. One day, we got a request from a veterans center a few hours away. They had a new therapy wing and wanted to introduce the residents to animal companions. They'd heard about Clover and asked if she could visit. We said yes. The visit changed everything, but that's something I'll tell you more about next time. The drive to the veterans center started before sunrise. The frost still clung to the edges of the windshield, and Clover, wrapped in her wool blanket, had already claimed the passenger seat before I'd even opened the garage. Caleb followed behind in his pickup, bringing a few items we'd prepared for the visit. Comfort kits, a printed stack of journal excerpts, and a box of handmade paw print cards from the elementary school kids back home. We pulled into the gravel lot just after 8. The building was simple, low-roofed and quiet, nestled in a clearing surrounded by bare trees. A small flag flew gently above the main entrance. A man in uniform, older, with a weathered face and a thick gray mustache, stepped out to greet us. "You brought the famous Clover," he said with a grin. "I was starting to think you were a myth." "More legend than myth," I said, holding out a hand. "Kevin Dorsey." "Walter Briggs," he replied, shaking my hand firmly. "I run this place. Been hearing about that dog for months. The guys inside are excited." Inside, the facility felt more like a rustic lodge than a care center. Wood paneling, framed black and white photos on the walls, and the soft scent of cedar lingering in the air. We walked down a long hallway with sunlight filtering in through narrow windows. "They're in the rec room," Walter said. "Some of them haven't spoken much since they got here. Not because they're unfriendly, just tired." Clover walked with perfect composure, her tail swaying gently, her ears alert but relaxed. When we entered the room, the atmosphere shifted immediately. There were about a dozen men and 2 women, all seated around the room in clusters. Some were playing cards, others just staring out the windows. One man sat alone in the corner, hands folded in his lap, his gaze unmoving. Clover paused in the doorway. Then, with the confidence of someone who'd done this 100 times before, she trotted across the room. She didn't head for the closest group. She made a beeline straight for the man in the corner. He didn't flinch, didn't look down. But when she sat in front of him and rested her head gently on his knee, something changed. His hands moved. Not much, just a twitch. Then a slow lift, one hand reaching down to rest on her head. The room went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Walter whispered, "That's Henry. Hasn't said a word in 6 months." Henry looked down at Clover. His eyes blinked once. Then he spoke. Just one word. Soft. Walter put a hand on my shoulder and gave it a squeeze. The rest of the day followed that rhythm. Clover visited each person, taking her time. Some patted her head. Others just smiled. A few wept without words. One woman read aloud from a small poetry book, her voice cracking midway through, and Clover curled up at her feet like she'd done it all before. Caleb helped hang up a small photo display of Ben Carter. We didn't call it a memorial. We called it a window. Just glimpses of the man who once crossed the sea with a dog and a broken heart. A story told not through loss, but through what survived. That evening, as the sun dipped low and cast long gold streaks across the hills, Walter invited us to stay for supper. We sat at long wooden tables with the residents, passing bowls of stew and fresh bread. Laughter returned, slowly but surely. And Clover, full belly and sleepy eyes, laid herself down right in the center of the dining room floor, tail giving a single thump whenever someone walked by. Back at the guest cabin behind the center, I stepped out for a moment, standing on the porch with a cup of tea and watching the stars slowly come alive overhead. Caleb joined me a few minutes later. "She did more today than I could have hoped," he said. "She always does," I replied. "She found him," he added. "That man, Henry. She found the one person who needed her most." I nodded. She always knows. After we returned home, things didn't go back to normal because, in some ways, a new normal had already taken root. The Veterans Center invited us back monthly. A few other care facilities reached out, too. One even asked if Clover could be part of a new study on canine-assisted recovery. I declined the formal research part, but agreed to keep visiting. Clover's Compass got more visitors. People sent in their stories. Grief, hope, recovery, and always dogs. There was one from a man in Arizona who'd found a beagle under his porch after losing his wife. Another from a woman in Michigan who took in a limping mutt the same week her cancer went into remission. We started adding those stories to the website, one by one. Clover became more than a dog. She was a symbol, not of survival, but of connection. The space between two souls where words didn't need to live for love to grow. And through it all, Caleb changed too. He stayed longer between trips, started taking on jobs closer to town. He fixed the fence behind my house, repainted the porch, and even helped me build a small wooden bench out by the lake. One evening, we sat on that bench with Clover sprawled at our feet, eyes half closed as the last light danced across the water. "She never let go of him," Caleb said. "Even after the boat, even after the silence. She held on to everything he gave her." "She carries it," I said, "like it's still alive." He turned to me. "So do you." That surprised me. You didn't just rescue a dog. You carried his story too. I didn't know what to say, so I just reached down and scratched Clover behind the ears. Her tail gave that soft, familiar thump. Around Christmas, the town organized a community night at the marina, with lights strung from every pier and cocoa stands set up under the lighthouse. Clover wore a green scarf with tiny jingle bells. Kids swarmed around her, parents thanked us again and again, and somewhere between the carolers and the laughter, it hit me. This story wasn't ending. It was expanding. That winter, a retired teacher named Janine approached me after one of Clover's visits to a rehab center. She handed me a folded letter. "I lost my son in the service," she said, 15 years ago. "I never wanted to talk about it, but I've been volunteering here, and today, when I watched that dog sit with those men, I felt like I could breathe again. I think it's time I write his story." I added her story to the compass. The site kept growing. We needed help moderating, so Caleb took over the submissions inbox. He started writing back to people, sometimes long letters, sometimes just a thank you. But every reply mattered. One spring morning, I woke to find Clover sitting at the edge of the porch, looking out at the road. Not alarmed, just still. I sat beside her. "Someone coming?" A minute later, a dusty old minivan pulled up. A man stepped out holding a dog leash and a small duffel bag. A shepherd mix climbed down behind him. The man looked nervous. I heard you help dogs find second chances, and I don't know where else to go." "Oh." Clover stood, walked over, and touched noses with the other dog. Then she turned to me. I knew what she was saying. We'd need more beds. We didn't have a formal name for what we were doing. Not yet. But it was growing. Whatever this thing was that started with one quiet dog in an abandoned boat and turned into a kind of sanctuary without walls. Word got around. Clover's Compass became more than a story-sharing site. It became a bridge. We rearranged the guest room to serve as a temporary dog space. Then Caleb suggested converting the old tool shed out back. A friend from his contracting days came to help us insulate it, lay new flooring, and add a little porch. By the time the paint dried, it had become a cozy 3-dog cabin, complete with beds, blankets, and a tiny bookshelf with laminated care instructions. The man with the shepherd mix, whose name turned out to be Lionel, stayed in town for a week. He didn't talk much at first, but after the second day, he asked if he could help with feeding time. By the third day, he started volunteering to walk the new dogs we were slowly taking in. The fourth day, he asked where he could buy a notebook. "I've never told anyone about my time in Iraq," he said, gripping the spiral binding tightly. "But your compass thing? It made me want to try." Lionel ended up staying 3 months. We didn't ask questions. Everyone arrived with something unsaid. Clover taught us that what people needed first wasn't fixing. It was company. Quiet company. The kind that listened with its whole body, without interrupting. Dogs did that best. By early May, we had 5 dogs under care and 3 regular volunteers. One was a high school senior named Ryan, who needed service hours to graduate. He started out shy, unsure how to handle the dogs, but Clover picked him immediately. She walked over during his first visit and nudged a leash into his hand. He looked at me wide-eyed. "She wants me to take her?" "Looks like it." They ended up walking 2 miles that afternoon. Ryan came back every Saturday after that, sometimes with peanut butter treats in his pockets, sometimes just with a notebook full of poetry. One day he asked if he could read a poem aloud to the dogs. I said yes. He stood in the middle of the fenced-in yard while the dogs lounged in the grass or wandered around sniffing each other. He read with a soft voice, steady but a little unsure. Clover sat near his feet and looked up the entire time, her ears twitching like they understood every word. After he finished, he said quietly, "That's the first time I've read anything out loud. Ever." By summer, Clover's Compass was on its way to becoming a registered non-profit. Caleb and I filed the paperwork with help from a lawyer in town who waived most of his fees. We wrote up a mission statement that read, "To carry love forward through the companionship of dogs, one story at a time." We got a small grant from the county and a donation from a local business that had seen Clover's story featured in a weekend human interest segment on public radio. The segment ended with a line that stuck with me. "Not all heroes wear capes. Some wear collars." We used the money to expand the dog cabin and add an outdoor play enclosure. One of the dogs we took in during that time was a small terrier named Minnie. She'd been found under a highway overpass, shaking and nearly hairless from mange. The vet warned us she might not respond to other dogs right away, but the moment she met Clover, she trotted forward like she recognized her. Clover lowered her head and let Minnie sniff her ears. Then she lay down, inviting her to cuddle. Minnie curled up instantly. It was like she'd found an old friend. Minnie's recovery was slower than the others, but every milestone mattered. First bark, first tail wag, first time she took food from someone's hand without flinching. We wrote them all down, and people kept coming. Some were just visitors. Others were people like Lionel, grief carriers and wanderers who didn't know they needed a soft place to land. One woman, Elise, came all the way from North Carolina after reading about Clover's visits to the Veterans Center. She brought a golden mutt named Tucker, who had belonged to her late husband. "I didn't know what to do with all his stuff," she said, "but I couldn't let go of Tucker. Then I read about you folks, and I thought maybe this is the place." She stayed 3 weeks and ended up leading our first informal grief and dog care workshop. The workshop ran on folding chairs, lemonade, and shared stories. Caleb, who still didn't talk much in big groups, stood in the back with Clover, offering quiet smiles and handing out handouts he had designed himself. After the workshop, Elise asked if she could set up a small donation page for Clover's Compass. "You should let people give back," she said. "You've given plenty." We hesitated. It felt strange to accept help for something that had grown so organically. But Elise was right. There were people out there who wanted to feel part of something healing. So we did. And they gave. Not just money, but notes, letters, stories. One even mailed us a blanket with embroidered names of every dog they'd lost over the past 30 years. We hung it in the dog cabin, just above the shelf with the treat jars. And through it all, Clover kept doing what Clover did. She showed up. Every day. She waited at the gate when a new arrival came. She stood beside volunteers when they didn't have the words. She slept next to dogs who couldn't sleep alone. Then, in late summer, a call came from the city. The Children's Hospital wanted to create a partnership. They'd seen the Compass site and asked if Clover could participate in their upcoming therapy dog pilot program. It would involve short weekly visits to pediatric patients, mostly kids recovering from surgery or long-term treatments. We said yes without hesitation. The first visit was quiet. The room was filled with soft beeping machines, plastic curtains, and nurses who moved like wind through leaves. But Clover didn't falter. She walked slowly from bed to bed, pausing at each child's side and waiting. One boy, maybe 6 or 7, had a shaved head and IV tubes taped to both arms. He reached out a trembling hand, and Clover nuzzled it gently. "She's like a cloud," he whispered. After that, the hospital called every week. Caleb made special badges for each dog visit, tiny paper medals for the kids to pin on Clover's vest. "Captain Comfort," one said. Another read, "The best listener." Clover wore them proudly. Back home, the work continued. We expanded our record-keeping system, added intake forms, created a newsletter. Ryan, the high school senior, graduated and asked if he could intern before college. We said yes. He became our first full-time summer intern, helping us design a new compass logo, a paw print inside a compass rose. As fall rolled around again, I found myself looking at Clover differently. Not because she was slowing down. She wasn't. If anything, she had more energy than when we first met. But something in her eyes had deepened. It was as if she now carried 100 stories in her gaze, and when she looked at someone, she weighed what they needed against everything she had seen. One evening, while brushing her coat under the porch light, I said aloud, "Do you know how much you've changed everything?" She blinked up at me. Her tail brushed the floor once. "I think you do." And I realized something in that moment. Clover had never just been a survivor. She was a guide. Not away from pain, but through it. We were building something sacred, and we still didn't have a name for it beyond the website. But maybe that was enough. Maybe Clover's compass was never about branding. Maybe it was about direction, and trust, and love that carried forward in fur and footsteps, and she still had places to go. By the second year of Clover's compass, we had a waiting list, not for dogs, but for people. Veterans, widows, high school counselors, pastors, hospice volunteers, even teachers on sabbatical. People from all over the country wrote in asking if they could visit, help, or just walk one of the dogs for a few hours. They didn't always know what they were looking for. But somehow, Clover had become the answer anyway. She still led every morning. Even before the coffee brewed, she'd be at the back door, waiting for whoever was sleeping in the guest cabin that week. If they were nervous, she'd trot halfway up the porch and pause, like an invitation without pressure. They always followed. One Monday in late October, we welcomed a new guest named Thomas. He was in his mid-50s, quiet, and carried everything he owned in a patched hiking backpack. He'd emailed us 2 weeks before, saying he had no references but needed a place to be for a while. Said he'd read Clover's story after seeing it linked on a grief support forum. He didn't say much else. When he arrived, Clover didn't go to him right away. She stood on the porch, watching. He approached slowly and held out his hand, palm down. She sniffed, then looked up at him. He didn't try to pet her. He just said, "You're more famous than you know." She sat. We gave him a warm meal, clean sheets, and space. The first 2 days, he barely spoke. He ate in silence, helped clean up, then wandered the perimeter of the property with a notebook and a pencil. On day 3, he asked if he could help mend one of the broken garden fences. He worked quietly, steady hands, efficient movements. Clover sat beside him the whole time, nose in the breeze, eyes on the woods. That evening, while we were brushing down the dogs, he said, "I had a son once. He would have loved this place." That was all he said. But it was more than enough. Clover stood and pressed her head into his hip. His shoulders sank, but it wasn't from weight. It was like something finally released. He stayed 2 weeks, built a new compost system, repaired every squeaky gate. On the last day, he left behind his notebook, open to a single page. "Some losses are too big to be fixed, but some places help you carry them better." Clover lay in front of that notebook all night. The next guest was a woman named Marcy. She was a youth librarian from Oregon, recently retired and newly widowed. She came with an old black lab named Geraldine, who had cloudy eyes and a limp in her back leg. Marcy said Geraldine was her last tie to her husband. "She's the only one who was there for all of it," Marcy told me over tea. "When he got sick, when he passed, when I lost my job, I think she knows more about me than I do." Clover took to Geraldine gently. She didn't try to play or wrestle. She just sat nearby, calm and accepting. One afternoon, they lay side by side in the warm patch of grass behind the tool shed, and Marcy took a photo. "This is peace," she said. "I didn't know I still had some of that in me." Marcy ended up writing a short children's book while she stayed. She called it The Dog Who Waited by the Water. We added it to our Compass library, and she left a copy behind for the next guest. As the seasons shifted again, we held our first community open house. Caleb printed flyers, Ryan organized the volunteers, and the town's middle school band offered to play a few tunes. We had coffee, cider, and a donation table filled with homemade dog treats and crocheted toys. Over 200 people came. Clover, now older but still sharp-eyed and light on her feet, greeted every guest like they'd known her for years. One boy asked if she could do tricks. She didn't sit or roll over. Instead, she placed a paw gently in his lap and looked him in the eye. The boy smiled. "That's better than any trick." Later that night, while we swept the porch and packed away folding chairs, I found Clover lying beside a girl who had stayed behind. Her name was Becky. She had been quiet most of the afternoon, never far from her mother's side. But now she sat cross-legged on the porch, petting Clover slowly. "She doesn't make me feel like I have to talk," Becky said. "I like that." Her mother watched from the gate, teary-eyed, but smiling. In the following weeks, Caleb started a new project, carving memory tiles. They were small, palm-sized wooden squares with the name of a dog or person etched on one side and a compass design on the other. Visitors or volunteers could write memories or messages on them. We hung them on a wire along the east fence line, where the wind moved through like a song. The first tile he made was for Ben Carter. We added more. Minnie, Geraldine, Thomas's son, a volunteer's father. A dog named Lucky. The wire grew longer. The tiles clicked together in the breeze like wind chimes without sound. In December, a snowstorm blanketed the grounds. Everything slowed down. We paused all visits except emergencies, focused on keeping the dogs warm and well-fed. Caleb strung up lights around the main cabin, and we hosted a small holiday dinner with just the core volunteers. Clover wore a knit hat someone had mailed from Illinois. It kept falling over her eyes, and she'd shake it off every time until someone gently readjusted it. At the table, someone asked, "Do you think she knows?" "What?" I asked. "That she started all this." I looked at Clover, curled near the fire, breathing slow and deep. "Maybe," I said. "But I don't think she needs to know. I think she just needed to be allowed to be who she is." The room went quiet for a moment. Then Ryan said, "That's the kind of story people need now. One that doesn't save the world, but shows you how to stay soft in it." That line stayed with me for days. The new year brought new letters. A veteran from Kansas who built a wooden wheelchair ramp for his neighbor's dog. A teenager in Florida who started a dog reading group at her school. A grandmother in Ohio who knitted blankets for shelter pets after losing her own dog. We featured their stories one by one, not for attention, but because every time someone read them, another door opened. And then, one morning in March, Caleb came into the house holding a letter with no return address. "It's from someone named Raymond," he said. Inside was a photo of a dog that looked almost identical to Clover. Same eyes, same patch of white fur on her chest. The letter said, "I think I found her sister." The photo was grainy, but clear enough. A lean, short-haired mutt, the color of river stones, with those same thoughtful eyes Clover had when she was still cautious around people. She stood next to an older man, maybe mid-60s, in a weathered flannel jacket and wide-brimmed hat. They were on the porch of what looked like a trailer home in the hills somewhere. No snow, no fall leaves, just dry grass and the shadow of a pickup behind them. "She could be Clover's twin," Caleb said, passing the photo back to me. The letter inside had no last name, no city, just a first name, Raymond, and a P.O. box in Montana. He said he'd been given the dog 2 years earlier by a friend who couldn't keep her. Said he never knew her full history, but always had a feeling she came from something big. Then last month, someone in his small town had forwarded him a printout of Clover's compass. He thought it was a joke at first. Then he saw the eyes. The dog's name was Dusty. "She's not mine," he wrote. "Not really. She's with me. But I've always felt like she's waiting on someone. I don't know if Clover is that someone, but I thought you should know." I sat on the porch with Clover in my lap and read the letter again. She didn't react much at first, but when I got to the line about Dusty waiting, she looked up at me and let out the softest sigh. Not a whimper, just a breath full of memory. Caleb and I talked it over that night. We didn't know what we were walking into, but something about the way Dusty's posture matched Clover's, especially in that photo, felt too aligned to be coincidence. "Let's go," Caleb said. "We'll take the truck." It took 3 days to plan. Ryan offered to manage things while we were away, and 2 volunteers agreed to take night shifts in the cabins to check on the dogs. We loaded a duffel with food, water bowls, extra leads, and a first aid kit. Clover sat in the back seat with her blanket and looked out the window like she knew we weren't heading to the grocery store. We drove west through winding highways and open plains. Somewhere in South Dakota, we stopped to rest. Clover walked a few slow laps around a roadside park, sniffed at a patch of grass under a picnic table, and then curled up on my coat. "You really think she remembers?" Caleb asked as we sat beside her. "She never forgot anything that mattered." We reached Montana just as the sun was rising, painting the sky a wide, dusty orange. The P.O. box address led us to a small town with 1 diner, 1 gas station, and a post office the size of my living room. Raymond was waiting for us outside it. He waved when he saw Clover, then hesitated, then slowly walked over, removing his hat. "She's even prettier than the photo," he said. "She's curious," I said, nodding toward her. She was staring at him, ears slightly forward, head tilted. "I brought Dusty," he said. "She's at the house. It's a bit of a drive, but I figure if they're gonna meet, it should be someplace they both feel safe." We followed his truck through winding gravel roads and up a narrow hill lined with scrub trees. His house was modest, small porch, tin roof, and a wind chime made of old keys. Dusty sat on the steps, watching us. She didn't move right away. Clover stepped out first. She didn't run, didn't bark. She just walked slowly, tail at half-mast, ears relaxed. Dusty stood, took 2 tentative steps forward. Then they touched noses. It wasn't dramatic, no sudden jumping or whining, just this quiet moment of acknowledgement, like they'd once shared something neither of them could explain, and now they were simply remembering it together. Raymond wiped his eyes with his sleeve. She never did that with other dogs. "They remember," I said softly. even if we don't know what they remember. We spent the afternoon on Raymond's porch. Dusty and Clover stayed close, alternating between lounging near the steps and sniffing the yard. Raymond showed us old photos, mostly of Dusty, but there was one that stopped me. It was an old printed photo, probably from a disposable camera. A boat. Not the one I found Clover on, but another similar trawler, years younger, tied to a dock. 2 puppies sat side by side on the deck. One was clearly Clover. The other was almost certainly Dusty. "That belonged to my cousin," Raymond said. "He passed years back. His wife, too. Their dogs ended up getting scattered. I never knew where they all went." My throat tightened. So Clover had a sister. Raymond didn't want to part with Dusty, and I didn't want to suggest it. But before we left, he asked if we thought Dusty could visit the Compass. "Just for a while," he said. "See where her sister ended up." Caleb smiled. "We'd love that." We stayed overnight, then packed Dusty's food, her leash, and her favorite old towel. She rode with Clover in the back seat the whole way home. They didn't sleep, didn't play, just leaned gently against each other. Back at the Compass grounds, Dusty explored slowly. She was older, maybe a year more than Clover, with a stiffer gait and a more skeptical eye. But she followed Clover everywhere. The porch, the dog cabin, even the tile fence line. She sniffed every square. When she reached Ben Carter's tile, she sat. We didn't say a word. That week, the Compass changed again. Clover had always been the heart, but Dusty added something quieter, like a second heartbeat, a rhythm that matched the first, but added weight. The dogs loved her. She was firm but gentle. She didn't like sudden movements, but she let every kid pet her when we visited the children's hospital the next weekend. One of the nurses said, "It's like they're passing energy between them." We agreed. Then came the letter from the Animal Therapy Organization. They'd been following Clover's Compass updates and wanted to recognize both Clover and Dusty at their national summit that summer. Caleb made a pair of compass-shaped name tags. "North and West," he said with a grin. "Because Clover's always been our North. But Dusty brought something wild and grounded. She's the West Wind." We accepted the invitation. But before the summit, something happened that none of us expected. A young woman named Janie arrived with a small shepherd puppy in her arms. She said she'd driven overnight after seeing a feature about us on a podcast. "She needs somewhere safe," Janie said. "Her name's Bramble." The puppy had a scar down one leg and eyes too serious for her age. She didn't bark. She didn't wag. She just watched everything. Dusty approached first, sniffed her, then stepped back and gave one deep, short woof. Clover came next. She sat beside Bramble. No noise, just presence. And then Bramble wagged her tail. Bramble grew fast. Not just in size, though by her 3rd week at the Compass, her legs already looked a little too long for her body. She grew in spirit, in presence. That dull, haunted stillness she arrived with gave way to something more curious, more alert. At first she followed Dusty. Always Dusty. Wherever the older dog went, Bramble was a shadow behind her. When Dusty curled up near the porch, Bramble curled beside her. When Dusty gave a soft woof at the morning wind, Bramble mimicked her, though hers sounded more like a squeak. Clover observed it all with quiet approval. She didn't intervene. She didn't hover. She simply watched from wherever she happened to be. On the edge of the play yard, by the cabin door, under the picnic table during lunch. And let the world unfold. That spring was our busiest yet. We had more volunteers than we had bunks. Caleb converted the garage loft into a quiet sleep space, and a woman from Minnesota offered to donate portable fencing panels so we could build more safe play areas. Our compass map, the one on the wall inside the main room, had become filled with pins marking where every visitor, donor, or letter had come from. By the end of March, we had over 100. We also received a surprise visit from someone we hadn't seen in nearly a year. Lionel. He pulled up in a different truck, a little cleaner, and stepped out looking healthier, steadier. His shepherd mix wasn't with him. He passed, Lionel said, but it was good, peaceful, right in my arms. He didn't say more. He didn't need to. He walked the property with Clover at his side like he'd never left. He stayed 2 nights, didn't ask for a bed, just rolled out his sleeping bag in the old garden shed, the one he'd helped us clear when he first arrived. I didn't come to stay, he said the next morning. Just needed to see it again, to see her. He knelt beside Bramble, who sniffed his boots, and then sat, waiting. She'll lead something someday, Lionel said. Not like Clover, but different. She's got questions. You can see it. We hadn't seen it before, not fully, but now we did. Bramble didn't just follow anymore. She explored, watched, remembered. One afternoon, she nosed open the gate to the memory tile path. The gate was usually latched, but someone had forgotten to do it. Instead of wandering aimlessly, Bramble walked straight down the path, nose low, ears tilted slightly forward. She stopped at Ben Carter's tile. Then Clover joined her. They stood side by side for a long time. That same week, a new request came from a hospice center in upstate New York. They had heard about our therapy work and asked if we could bring Clover for a series of sessions with a group of patients in long-term palliative care. It was far, but we said yes. Dusty couldn't make the trip. Her hips had grown stiff, and we didn't want to push her. But Bramble came. She wasn't official yet, no training, no badge, but she had Clover. The drive was long. Caleb and I took turns behind the wheel. Bramble rode quietly, pressed close to Clover in the back seat. At a rest stop, a woman walking her retriever approached and said, "They move like they've done this forever." We smiled. The hospice center was beautiful. Soft lighting, floor-to-ceiling windows, and gardens that were just starting to wake up with early spring tulips. The staff welcomed us like old friends. They had a room ready with dog beds, treats, and a sign on the door that read, "Clover and Friends." The sessions were quiet, respectful. Clover settled instantly beside each bed, her head on the edge of the mattress, eyes soft, movements slow. Bramble followed her lead. At first, she hovered, waited, watched. But by the second day, she began approaching patients on her own. A woman named Lila, who hadn't opened her eyes in 2 days, moved her fingers when Bramble laid her head beside her pillow. A man named Stuart whispered something no one could catch. Then, when Bramble rested her paw on the bedspread, he said, "That's the softest thing I've touched in weeks." The staff took notes. So did we. By the final day, Bramble had found her rhythm. She moved slower than Clover, but stayed longer. Sometimes she curled up entirely on the floor beside the beds, refusing to leave until the patient fell asleep. The last visit ended with an informal gathering in the garden. Nurses, family members, and a few residents who could sit up joined us around a few folding tables with lemonade and sugar cookies. A boy, maybe 10, whose grandfather had passed that morning, sat quietly on a bench. Bramble walked over and placed her head gently in his lap. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. he just pet her for 20 minutes straight. When we left, the staff hugged us. One nurse whispered, "Clover started something, but Bramble brought it forward." Back home, things had changed. Dusty, slower now, didn't rise quite as quickly in the mornings. She still patrolled the perimeter and still greeted guests with a quiet woof, but we could see the years weighing gently on her limbs. We didn't panic. We didn't mourn. We let her set the pace. Clover adjusted too. She began letting Bramble lead the morning walks. She followed now, a soft guardian a few steps behind. Caleb carved 2 new memory tiles, one with Dusty's name, for when the time came, and one blank. "For Bramble," he said. "Someday." Ryan, now a college freshman studying animal behavior, visited on weekends. He brought books, videos, and a notebook filled with ideas. "I think we can start training Bramble formally," he said. "She's ready." Clover seemed to agree. During the first training session, Bramble responded to every command without hesitation, not with sharpness, but with trust. That summer, we received a letter from the same children's hospital we'd visited the year before. They wanted to name their new therapy wing after Clover. We were stunned. It wasn't about fame. It was about what she'd done. The moments, the presence, the way she held grief in her gaze, like it wasn't a burden, but a bridge. We accepted. At the dedication ceremony, the wing's new plaque read, "The Clover Room, where love waits quietly and healing begins." Clover didn't seem fazed. She let a dozen kids scratch her ears and feed her treats. Bramble sat beside her, her tail thumping steadily. Later that week, as the sun set and fireflies rose from the tall grass beyond the cabin, I sat on the porch and watched Clover stretch out on the steps. Bramble lay beside her. Dusty dozed just inside the doorway. Caleb came out with 2 mugs of tea and a fresh stack of letters from the Compass inbox. "You ever think we were supposed to find that boat?" he asked. "I think it was supposed to find us." He nodded. "Feels like it knew where to land." Clover opened one eye, then closed it again. And in the quiet hum of that evening, with the last glow of day sinking behind the trees and 3 dogs resting in the warmth of what they'd built, I realized something I hadn't dared say aloud before. We weren't just telling Clover's story anymore. We were living inside it. Clover began slowing down near the end of fall. Not in an obvious way. She still walked every morning, still greeted the arriving volunteers with her soft tail thump and steady gaze. But something shifted. She slept deeper, dreamed more, spent longer minutes just staring across the tree line as if listening to something only she could hear. Dusty, too, had grown gentler with time. Her hearing had faded some, but not her sense of presence. She and Clover now rested together more often than they moved, and when Bramble returned from a visit or training run, she always checked in with a soft nose nudge before darting off to chase the next job. The Compass never truly paused. Stories kept arriving. Visitors came. A boy from Colorado sent in his school project about rescue dogs and titled it, "The Ones Who Teach Us." A woman from Georgia wrote that her teenage daughter had started walking neighborhood dogs for free to help with her anxiety. She says she feels more like herself when she's holding a leash, the letter read. We pinned that one above the sink, where everyone could see it. In early November, we hosted our final therapy event of the year at the local middle school. It was a rainy Friday. Bramble, now certified, took the lead. Clover came, of course, but stayed near the bench most of the day, letting children come to her rather than stepping forward. One girl with short red hair and bandages on both knees sat beside her for nearly an hour. "She listens better than people," the girl whispered. Clover gave a slow blink, then gently placed her chin on the girl's leg. That night, back home, Clover didn't eat dinner right away. She just curled into her favorite rug near the hearth and rested. Bramble lay beside her, unusually still. Dusty came and sat with them, her stiff legs folding slow but firm. Caleb noticed first. He knelt beside Clover and brushed a hand down her side. "She's tired," he said quietly. I didn't ask what he meant. I already knew. Over the next few days, we adjusted everything. No more long visits, no travel. We brought the world to her instead. People sent in voice recordings, little video messages, drawings from kids who had once met her for only a few seconds, but never forgot her. I read the letters aloud to her, every night. One came from Martha, Ben Carter's sister. She wrote, "I always wondered if he ever found peace. You helped me believe he did. Tell Clover thank you." Another came from Caleb's father, a man I'd never met. He wrote, "You raised my son with a quiet steadiness I didn't have the words for. But that dog taught him something I never could. I'm grateful." And then one evening, as frost gathered on the windows and the fire crackled low, Clover stretched one final time, let out a small sigh, and laid her head on Bramble's shoulder. She didn't rise again. There were no vet visits, no frantic calls, just silence and warmth and her family. Bramble didn't leave her side that night, nor the next morning. Dusty sat in the doorway, facing out, as if keeping watch. We buried Clover beneath the tallest pine tree at the edge of the campus grounds. Caleb built a simple wooden marker. Ryan, who had driven in without being asked, carved a compass into it by hand. The inscription read, "She didn't change the world. She changed the ones who did." We didn't plan a public service, but the day we laid her to rest, people began to arrive. One car, then another, then a line. No invitations had been sent, no announcement posted. They just came. Lionel arrived with a backpack full of letters from fellow veterans. Elise brought a quilt embroidered with stories people had shared on the website. The Children's Hospital sent a handmade book of drawings titled The Clover Room. That evening, someone lit a candle, then someone else. By nightfall, the whole path to the memory tile line glowed. We created a new section, the legacy wall. Not for grief, for gratitude. We placed Clover's tile at the center. Dusty passed a month later. Quietly, in her sleep. Her tile went just beside Clover's. The compass went quiet for a while. Not empty, just softer. The dogs still came. Bramble still worked. But we all moved a little slower, watched the sky a little more. One morning, Caleb and I stood beside the bench Clover used to lie under. Bramble approached with something in her mouth, a twig, small and straight. She laid it on the bench, then looked at us. "She's asking," Caleb said. "For what?" I asked. He looked down at the twig. "A beginning." So we gave her one. Bramble's compass became a sister branch of our work. With her came new volunteers, a new generation of rescues, and a training program focused on the next wave of therapy dogs. We added a reading room for children and a reflection trail lined with benches named after the dogs who'd taught us how to be still. Clover's cabin remained untouched. Visitors could sit there and read from the original journal, the one Ben Carter left behind. We laminated the pages. Children called it the Boat Book. Years passed, but the story never faded. It became more than a tale told around campfires or in newsletters. It became a living rhythm, a set of choices people made to show up, to soften, to trust. One day, a boy asked me, "Was Clover real?" I looked down at him and nodded. "She was the most real thing I've ever known." He thought about that for a moment, then asked, "And Bramble?" "She's still writing her part." He smiled. "I think I want to help." And just like that, the story kept going.